Good evening. It's very, very unusual for me to be in a room that is predominantly British. So I'm trying not to mention the 23rd. I may find it too difficult. I have very strong views on the subject, and my neighbour takes the opposite view, so we're annihilating each other's vote, which is quite amusing, because he's a great guy, apart from in this one issue. No, I'm very rarely in a room with entirely Brits. I think nearly all my really close friends are non-English, including my wife. And it's funny. So if things go weirdly on the 23rd, there may be more of these events, and I'll be forced to spend evening after evening with the Brits. Now, I'm imagining, I've just come back from the Venice Biennale, and a lot of people treat you as a representative English person, and they ask you certain sorts of questions. So I'm sort of going to reconstruct a typical bit of conversation that I might have with the bloke from San Diego and his live-in partner, who's probably from Venezuela or Zagreb, doesn't really matter. And so a few questions that they asked me. Oh, yeah. Oh, AJ, what's that? And I sort of explain what it is. What's your relationship with it? Well, I say, actually, I have a very, very, very long relationship with it, because in the year that Archigram, the first broadsheet, came out, the AJ was the first thing to publish it, published a whole page of this weird sheet. And then there was a bloke who did a bit of a critique. He said, the authors of this should read Descartes' treatise on method, he said, or wrote. He worked for the RIBA, of course, and has disappeared from view, which I think Archigram has not. But the other thing, interestingly, for the AJ, it was the first publication in which I saw a very, very, very weird, fascinating building that haunted me for years. It haunted me probably for the next 25 years until I had the good luck to visit it with the architect. And it is the used to be called the Bank of London and South America, and it's in Buenos Aires. And for me, for a number of reasons I haven't got time to go into, is my favorite 20th century building. It's just absolutely stunningly brilliant, beautiful, clever, tricksy, elegant, weird building. So my friends in Venice say, you always be looking at stuff outside the UK. And I suppose I sort of have. I think I'm being a provincial child and wanting to do architecture from the age of 11. I'd seen a lot of stuff before I went to the local library. And before I even went to the little architecture school in Bournemouth, before the A, I used to be looking at stuff like this. I'm lucky enough to have seen two of those things. One was pulled down long before I was born. I was looking at weird stuff done by sort of half-Irishmen in Mexico City who became painters. I was looking at Egon. I was fascinated by new German architecture. In fact, I got a scholarship from the A to look at new German architecture in the 50s. I was fascinated by it. They did it so much better than the Brits, even then. And Aspelund's Paradise Restaurant in the Stockholm exhibition 1930s is probably still a stunner, even though I never saw it. And I did manage to meet Roberto Burle Marx. So yes. So then they say, well, come up to you and say, why was your British pavilion so weird, so boring, so archaic? I said, I didn't do the bloody thing. You know, I happen to be British, but sorry, guys, no connection with the perm next door. But nonetheless, if not all the UK identifies with this stuff, there is a certain tendency. I mean, frankly, I get more buzz from C.P. Hart's showroom, but that was actually part of the pavilion. No, there is a camp, probably represented in this tent, that enjoys what I call the grim, biscuit-coloured world. I don't know whether Alice Woodman is in the room, but you know what I mean. And I don't know whether it's just sort of cold baths or Gordonstoun or you know, hairy tweed jackets or something, but there's this sort of strange mixture of analness and kind of... Why they don't get bored of themselves, I can't make it out. And that is a very definite position, which even appears in the Architectural Review from time to time, as we well know. So my friends say, well, okay. What's the other position? I think there is what I would call the inventive creative tradition. When I first came up to the A from Bournemouth, the really smart people, I think Chris Woodward and his friends were measuring a thing called the Great Laxey Wheel. They did this amazing, which is on the Isle of Man. And then shortly afterwards, there was the example of, I saw some weird working drawings secretly of this building that was about to appear in Leicester. And there is our wonderful seaside tradition, inventive tradition of piers, or of the best bubble building in the world. I think probably still the best building in London. And I like showing this when I'm in Germany, because I say we have a very legitimate tradition of bubble architecture in England, going back to the 19th century, and we also used to, on television, have Mr. Blobby. And they find that very weird. But I love them as a completely committed European. I love Heath Robinson, the cartoonist of the early 20th century, and the British high-tech movement. I mean, there's definitely a connection, and it's a wonderful one. They're both daft and they're both lovely, and they both love things that do things. And I think the creative tradition is very much to do with things that do things. But now, you guys have got to get used to the fact that the new hot guy is in town. He's opening his office this week. And there he is, and the thing in the Serpentine is not to be sneezed at. It looks like a model of a sort of city of the future, or a city of the future circa 1960, but it's great. And he's an amusing guy. Now that, you've got to be what? He's not one to be a straight up and down. He's actually quite a laugh. And he enjoys himself, and he does stuff, and he does lots of stuff. So watch it, guys. He's going to be in this, he probably won't come along, but he'll be bigger than any of you in 2 years, 3 years. And of course, the one that they love to hate. The Biscuit Boys loved to hate and be bitchy, even after she was dead, of Zaha, who some of us miss enormously. I think the cultural situation of British architecture will miss more than they really expect. Okay, so if there is this creative tradition, where is it being nurtured? And I have a particular interest in the answer. It is in what I call the Bloomsbury axis. Those two extraordinary schools, 7 blocks away from each other, which over the last few years have swapped graduates. So if you graduate from one, the chances are you'll end up teaching in the other, or vice versa. And I had, for a long time, groups of postgraduate students where always one half of the couple was at the other place and the other half of the couple at our place, meaning via the pillow, gossip moved down the road faster than you could say knife. And I love that. I think, okay, I'm sounding London-centric perhaps, but I think this is still, between those two places, very secretly aware of each other, a tremendous powerhouse. Okay, one of them has been voted once again the most popular. Internationally, it's probably the other one that's better. But it doesn't matter. They are collectively this extraordinary Bloomsbury powerhouse. The one, I think, the A is a wonderful place. It's become a bit pretentious, a bit American lately, and the Bartlett, highly creative, though it does have a few nerdish characters around the edges, but by and large they're amazing. But where do you go if you really want to be successful, where do you go if you want to have influence? You go to Cambridge, which does terrible architecture, but is very good at dinner parties, very good at networking, and of course can hire the people out of the powerhouse, I suppose. But it's an irritating fact that Cambridge, my wife, who's not English, observed this about 8 years ago. She said, actually, they all want to bloody Cambridge, but they do terrible. I mean, you look at Cambridge portfolios, which I did ad nauseum when they all came up to the Bartlett for their second degree. They don't do anything. It's a bit of shadow here, the flat roof there. Anyhow, I mean, I have been 50 years in the architectural education business. I think I have earned my position to comment on this. Now, is this creative school energy feeding through the system? And my friends from other countries, particularly other Europeans, say, what about the relationship of the schools to the offices? And where do the professors come from? If you go to Germany and you're a reasonably good architect, you become a professor. If you're in school, you have connections with offices. Offices have connections with schools. Now, some of you send spies to the shows. I know you do. I see the spies. I even know some of them. And the lucky people get phone calls before the exhibition's up saying, will you come and work for us? But you try and get those people back a year later, 6 years later, to do a crit. They have to pretend they're at the dentist. You try and get them back to teach. The office goes berserk, which is very, very foolish. I'm sorry, I'm going to take this opportunity to say it is one of the stupidest things that the British do, which is, and in a way, the schools are just as bad. What do good designers spend their time doing in offices? They go to these meetings. They half go to sleep in these meetings, where if they're not awake, they're outwitted by the people who are very good at going to meetings. The more bullshit time is spent in British architecture, in stupid meetings where everybody's trying to cover their backside and everybody's scared to do something that's an interesting piece of design. So it's layered and layered and layered until it's kind of squeezed out in the meeting. I have plenty of spies in amongst your offices, and I know this to be true. But where do the professors come from? Why aren't they coming from the profession? Why isn't the profession coming from the schools? Not just buying it and not sending it back. Because in other European countries, there is a definite interface between these two worlds. Now, the schools in some ways are just as bad because in recent years, they have taken on an American aspect, which is a sort of over-intellectualization of everything. And a lot of people teaching who are not really interested in buildings, but are interested in blah, blah. And so my cartoon, which I did a few years ago when we did the competition and won for Australian Architecture School, is, I question your terms of reference, Barbara, says a sort of poncy young faculty member. Barbara's shaking there, trying to think of reasons that she never had for what she does. So what happens to talented design people around in London and other cities? I think England is intriguing because in many countries that I visit, if you have a son or a daughter or a nephew or a niece who has a bit of architectural talent, you give them the job. It might be an extension, it might be a garage, it might be a block of flats, whatever. In England, you say, you have a son or daughter who's nice, and say, well, yes, it would be nice to give you the job, but we gave it to Mr. Smithers because he's very reliable and he'll get it through the planning. And it seems to be particular to the UK. It really, really, really is. It's a sort of conservatism of a irritating kind. But I mentioned somebody in particular who I think has done a couple of things that are intriguing. Number one, this very famous, nice architect has handed or is handing his office not over to two people who are good at meetings. I know both of them. I don't think they're particularly good at meetings. They're bloody good designers. Very unusual for somebody like that to hand on the office to designers. How many of you in this room would dare to do that? I ask you. The other thing is, it's not unknown that he has been responsible for passing work on to up-and-coming characters. I just show two lots of them, Wilkinson Eyre and Lifshitz, Davison, Sandlands, were nurtured, as in an earlier generation, Sir Leslie Martin would hand work on to interesting architects. How many of you are prepared to do that? So what about the boutique office? We have a boutique office. It's small but perfectly formed, and we would never get in the 100. We might get in, if there's an opposite league, we'd probably get into that one. And as a boutique office, we produce small but perfectly formed buildings that are perhaps audacious on the outside and, dare I say, exquisite and highly thought through on the inside. So my friends say, well, okay, what's really happening in London? Towers, I say, many, many towers, endless towers. 200, do I hear? Do I see 300? Suddenly occurred to me when I found this rather useful picture online, I thought, why is it that they're so tedious? The old American, the old almost pre-modernist towers understood something. They put style on the top, a bit of architecture on the bottom where you could see it and walk into it, and the rest is stuff. What good idea. Because most of the things that go up have neither style, dubious architecture, and don't like to admit that the stuff is stuff. I just offered that as a simple formula. So finally, what of the future? Wonderfully and ironically, our design future will be discussed in a building that was a kind of quite nice second-rate international wobbly, rather like some sports hall in Poland that happens to be in Holland Park. It's being done over by the jolliest minimalist that I know. He said, I'm not a minimalist, but he's good company, so I'll let him pass with the minimalism. And, of course, Dejan Sujic, I think, has a tremendous responsibility here. The other ironic thing is it's in the unfashionable side of London. I like that. Thank you.